To some extent, there's a bit of a warm glow in British society about how we dealt with the Jewish refugee situation as a result of Nazi persecution. People tend to assume that we did a lot more than we actually did. And actually it's a profound shock to people when they actually know the true story, that actually our record on providing protection to Jewish refugees from Nazi Germany was really a pretty shameful one. A couple of years ago I was involved quite extensively in some events around the centenary of the 1905 Aliens Act, which was effectively the first piece of anti-immigration legislation passed in this country. And it was very specifically aimed at stopping East European Jews coming to the UK. And the Jewish Museum, which if you're ever in London and you get a chance to go to that, I would recommend it. It's a very, very interesting museum. Did a lot of events to mark this, and they wanted to draw parallels between then and now. And one of the things that they did was they printed headlines from newspapers and asked people in this interactive exhibition to guess when that headline was from. And so you get headlines of the nature of, we must keep out these vermin invading our shores, as it were. And people would quite often guess that that was Daily Express 2005, only to find in fact that it was Daily Mail 1938. And the vermin, or the undesirables that the people were talking about there, were Jewish refugees, from Jewish refugees in Nazi Germany, which to our way of thinking now, when knowing what we know about the Holocaust, is almost horrifically unimaginable. But that was the public discourse at that time in quite large sections of British society. We have had a lot of Zimbabwean asylum seekers come to this country over recent years. Totally understandably that they should come here. Question we often get asked at the Refugee Council: why on earth is someone from Zimbabwe claiming asylum in the UK? Couldn't they go to South Africa or Botswana or Malawi or what have you? Of course, the fact of the matter is that most people displaced from Zimbabwe go into exactly those countries. But how anybody could ask the question of why a Zimbabwean wouldn't think to come to Britain, given our long links with that country, but they have come and have come in reasonably substantial numbers. And all of the people I've met, I've made a number of friends among that community, came here with frankly a sort of rather romantic view of what Britain was like, partly because the education system in Zimbabwe, at least until fairly recently, tended to rather paint a rather rosy picture of Britain's great tradition of sanctuary, as well as our respect for human rights and democracy and what have you. So they come here expecting, at the very least, to be treated with some dignity, and it's a profound shock to them to find that they're not. And this community, like all asylum seekers coming to Britain, are faced with a system which is built on, and forgive this sort of rather naff alliteration, but on 4 Ds, really. It's built on disbelief, it's built on destitution, built on detention, and it's built on deportation. And all the Zimbabwean refugees that I've met personally, and the community widely, have faced these situations as all asylum seekers do. The first one, and perhaps most fundamental, is this disbelief that an asylum system really is only designed to do one thing, which is that you come here, say, I need protection. The system should honestly assess whether you do or not. Refugee Council, to some extent controversially, because some people feel that we should accept everybody who comes to this country and claims protection. Our policy is that not everybody who says they need protection will need it, and consequently some people will and perhaps should be returned to their country of origin. But the system should be designed to honestly work out whether you need protection or not. And if you do, you get it, and if you don't, you don't get it. The system isn't designed like that now at all. The system is one designed, I would argue, exclusively to keep numbers down. So they are trying not to say, do you need protection or not? They're trying basically to unravel your story. And they use, the system is really a very vicious one. It's designed to try and catch you out, to see if they can see you lying, see if there's any consistencies in your story. And Zimbabweans and others have faced this situation where they come here, to a country they thought respected human rights, and then they've been put through the mill. and little things where, and just think about it, you know, you're in a state of trauma, you arrive in this country, you're alone, you're frightened, what have you, you often have an interview fairly early on the piece, then there's a long gap before you have another one. And if you happen to say, well, I was attacked by thugs of Sarnu PF on the 5th of April the first time, and then subsequently you say the 7th of April, the sort of thing you could easily do, oh, you're lying. You know, it was the 5th then and the 7th, it's an inconsistency. It must mean you don't need protection, refused. So that's the first thing they face. And so the vast majority of Zimbabwean refugees, like other refugees, get refused. I don't want to exaggerate how bad they are. The facilities aren't dreadful, and the people who run them aren't sort of deliberately horrible, but they are prisons, and they are holding a uniquely vulnerable group of people, often people who have had experience of detention. So the memory of their previous detention comes with them into their current detention. And I think the particularly horrible bit about it is it's detention without trial and without time limit. One of the things that all prisoners will say is that you count the days down if you're serving a prison sentence. A good friend of mine and a refused asylum seeker who spent a number of periods in detention said to me, the problem with me, of course, is I'm counting the days up. I've no idea how long I was going to be in. And people have spent up to a year in detention. I veer off and tell a little anecdote here, but I went to see some detained asylum seekers in Yarlswood, which is a centre in Bedfordshire. Famously got burnt down a few years ago, but they rebuilt it, so it's there again now. And I was in there seeing someone else, and someone mentioned a woman who was there and said, this woman's been in here nearly a year. And I sort of said, well, if she, I was thinking this is rather awful of me, but I do tend to think of these terms, you know, media initiatives, how we get things in the papers. I was saying, well, tell me when it is a year, nearly a year, and I'll see what I can do about it. And this was only a few weeks hence. And the people got back in touch with me and said that this woman was coming up for her year anniversary. So I phoned up a friend of mine who works for the Today programme, Radio 4's Today programme, and said, look, there's a woman in Yarlswood who's been in there for an entire year, and it would appear that it's largely sort of bureaucratic incompetence. They couldn't get the papers to get her released, and every time she saw a solicitor, they'd go up to have a meeting somewhere, and no one would be there. And it was just awful. And this woman's obviously her mental health was deteriorating because it was the trauma and the anxiety of being in this centre. I phoned up my friend at the Today programme, and you know, I did a little interview, and she phoned the woman in detention, and she did all this, and then finally, the day before it was due to be broadcast, she phoned up the Home Office and said, what are you going to do about it? That woman was released the following day. Now that is not a coincidence in my opinion, and it's also an absolute and total scandal, because in a sense, you know, most of the detainees are not lucky enough to know someone who happens to know someone who happens to know someone on the Today programme, who happens to phone up the Home Office, and the Home Office thinking, whoops, this is a hideous embarrassment, let's release this person, they can't run the piece, which they duly didn't. But it's just a digression, but it just shows you something about the system, and people just get trapped in it for months. And then, of course, the ultimate problem that people face is being returned. At the moment, in fact, people are not being forcibly returned to Zimbabwe because there's a court action, a very, very long-running court action, to say that it simply isn't safe to return anybody to Zimbabwe. In particular, because the very act of claiming asylum in the UK is regarded as an act of treachery by the Mugabe regime, and there's quite ample evidence to suggest that people are picked up at Harare Airport, people who were returned, and by virtue of having gone to Britain, a country that obviously Mugabe absolutely despises, they're regarded as traitors, and so they are particularly targeted for it. But other people still face it. One of the problems is a lot of Zimbabweans travel to this country on non-Zimbabwean passports, and that gives the Home Office the excuse to return them to a neighbouring country. And places like Malawi effectively just ping them back. So if you return someone to Malawi, you're effectively returning them to Zimbabwe.